Blog Talk Radio.
When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see. No, I won't be afraid. Oh, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. If the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, or the mountains should crumble the sea, I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. And darling, darling, stand by me, oh, stand by me, oh, stand now. Stand by me, stand by me. Stand by me, stand by me. Whenever you're in trouble, won't you stand by me? Oh, stand by me. Whoa,
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If it's Wednesday night, it's Off the Chain. I'm your host, Yvonne Mason. Welcome to the show. And when I picked that song for tonight's show, little did I realize that it would really resonate with the show. I'll get into that momentarily with my guest. Tonight, I want to tell y'all, once again, I know y'all probably get sick of hearing it, but too bad you're going to hear it. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. This morning when I looked at the numbers just for the show, it doesn't include all the podcasts because I didn't have time to run the numbers, but just on the show, ladies and gentlemen, we have hit another milestone. We're at 120,415 listeners. Okay, just let that sink in. Show will not be 2 years old until the middle end of July. We're at 120,415 listeners in 200-plus countries. So my question to you is, why in the world would you not want to be on this show? Either running ad or be a guest on this show. You would have an opportunity to be heard in places like Australia, who is our biggest listening base on the show. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. In New Zealand, Japan, Iran, China, Egypt, Israel, Europe, all over Europe, Portugal, Spain, Greece, Italy, England, Scotland, Wales. I mean, we're everywhere. We're in Israel. We're in Africa. We're in Nigeria. We're in South Africa. We're in Nairobi. There's places I've never even heard of they listen to us. So my question again is, why would you not want to be on the show? So there's two ways to be, and the year is filling up fast. I am already into November and December bookings. I am filled up through the end of October. So if you want to get on the show this year, you need to contact me at offthechainradio@yahoo.com, because I am getting into the last 2 months of 2018, believe it or not. Now, there's two ways. You can come on the show as a guest, or you can be a sponsor on the show. And for $10 a month, I'm not in it to be rich. It's just for $10 a month, whether I run 10 shows, whether I run 20 shows, I run your ad. And as most of you know, my husband is very ill. He is on the backside of this journey. And if I have to reschedule shows, I carry your ad over. It's a win-win. You don't lose anything. So contact me at offthechainradio@yahoo.com to either be on the show or run an ad. Either one. I'll tell you how to do them. It's easy as sitting on a log, as they say in Georgia or in the South. Just get in contact with me. With that being said, I want to quickly run two sponsors by that have been with me forever. Absolutely adore them. And because of this, the ad, this one sponsor's books hit #1 in the country of Australia. Her name is Diane Mote, and she is an author, and she has a book series. It's called the Sam Holden series, and this is what it's about. The first one is called Doggone, and the second one is called Dogfight. And it goes like this. Wherever a helpless animal whimpers in the dark, and wherever the system fails to protect said animal, she'll be there, and she isn't giving up any time soon, so you've been warned. When Sam Holden receives a tip about a brutal dog-fighting ring, she embarks on some of her most dangerous acts of vigilantism yet. The monster known as the puppeteer circles Sam's world while she circles his. As they chase each other, will Sam put those that she loves most in harm's way in order to break up the ring? With time running out and animals in need, the dangerous life Sam's created begins to eclipse any other life she could ever lead. No, you can't go now. You got to wait till after the show. But go on Amazon, on Kindle, and look up Diane Mote, and you can find Dogfight and also the first book, Doggone. She is an indie author, so give her some love and support. The second sponsor, who's been with me forever, God love her, her name is Cece Chamberlain, and she has a podcast called Inside Your Life with Cece. It is a motivational, passionate conversation. She interviews people who are living their true purpose, whether it's a professional boxer, an author, or even a history enthusiast. Cece strives to give you hope for a brighter day with her inspirational words. Download, subscribe, and listen as Cece guides you to pursue your dreams for you to live your best life. Her show is available on podcast.com, iTunes, Google Play, and everywhere podcasts are available. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been on that show, and when I got off that show, I felt reborn, rejuvenated, and recharged. So check out both of those ladies, and like I said, I'm booked up through the end of October. We're working on November and December even as I speak. So if you want to get on the show, just contact me on offthechainradio@yahoo.com. Tonight's show, this gentleman has been so patient. He has waited quite a few months. This is how backed up we are. He's waited quite a few months to be on this show, and I am forever grateful that he was so patient with me. He is an Alabama-born native. He is, as I like to say, from the South. We're all brothers and sisters when we're from the South. We might not come from the same bloodline, but when you're from the South, you're cousins. It doesn't matter. He lives in Merritt Island, which is about an hour and a half north of me. His name is John I. Jones. Middle name is Isaac, but he goes by John I. He is a retired journalist currently living, like I said, in Merritt Island, and for more than 30 years, John I. was a reporter for media outlets throughout the world. These included local newspapers in his native Alabama, the National Enquirer, Inquiring Minds Want to Know, News of the World in London, the Sydney Morning Herald, and NBC Television. He is the author of 5 novels, a short story collection, and 3 novellas, and we will get into those. But before we do, y'all know I love to tease you. We have to find out about John, because, as you know, what John writes is not the brand. John is the brand, and inquiring minds need to know these things. Welcome, John. Thank you for spending an hour with me.
Thank you for having me, Yvonne. Thank you very much.
Well, I need to know, when you were a young whippersnapper in the southern state of Alabama, was it always your desire to write, or was this something that you came upon as you begin your journey?
That's a good question. When I grew up on a farm, and my mother was a nurse, and consequently she wanted to guide me into the medical profession. And from early on, she wanted me to be a doctor. And I thought about it and wanted to make her happy. But by the time I was ready to go to college, I didn't have the patience to put 9-10 years into college. So my mother said, John, try to stay in the medical field. So I studied pharmacy for 3 years at Auburn University. And finally I discovered that I was doing something somebody else wanted me to do rather than what I wanted to do. And so I just put a halt to everything and stopped. I just stopped my life and roamed around for about 3 years, 4 years. I was in New Orleans. I was in Los Angeles. Wandered out to Montana. Wandered out to Colorado. And I kept reading about writers. And I learned that the common denominator of most writers is that one time or another they were reporters. So I kind of said to myself, if you get a job as a reporter, you'll learn the basics of, who, what, when, where, and why, and, how to sit down and construct a sentence, and then construct a paragraph, and then construct a chapter. So I went to work for my hometown newspaper in a little town called Gadsden, Alabama. And I was there for 5 years, and then I was in Birmingham for 3 years. I was an investigative reporter, got nominated for a Pulitzer. And then one day after... And I covered in suburban Birmingham. They have the primary cities are Bessemer, Midfield, Fairfield, Turner. They got a lot of little towns that are bedroom communities of Birmingham. So a friend of mine one day, he said, "Well, John," I said, "I won't see you anymore." I said, "I'm going to work for the National Enquirer." And at the time, I didn't really understand what he was talking about. I didn't know what he meant. He's talking about how good it's going to be, and it's going to travel and make a lot of money. And about a month later, they called me and wanted me to come do a tryout, and so I ended up with the National Enquirer. And so from 1975 until the OJ trial in 1995, all I did was just travel and write stories for, did Celebrity Scandal and how to get stains out of tablecloths and cornbread diets and, the standard tabloid fare.
How did you wind up with the news of the world in London, and then the Sydney Morning Herald, and then the NBC? Well,
now I worked during the OJ trial. I worked NBC Television was one of my biggest clients. When I was in LA, I was in LA in about 1979 till 1985, and I worked all kinds of celebrity stories, and the celebrity stories, now you can do a celebrity story for the United States, you can sell it in the United States. There are syndication services overseas. And sometimes the syndication services, they'll come directly to you to sell the story rather than buying it through the syndication in the States. A company like the National Enquirer, the New York Times, and Chicago Tribune, the stories that their reporters create, they syndicate to other publications. Consequently, a lot of particularly celebrity stories that I would do as a freelancer in Los Angeles, I would turn around and sell them overseas. I'd sell them to, the big papers on Fleet Street, I've sold them in France, sold them in Germany, sold them in Israel, and there's some good money in that. So in the process, I used to buy scripts of Beverly Hills 90210, and because in Australia they were huge fans. I mean, the Australians, they love Hawaii 90210, and so what I would do is I would buy a script of that week's show from somebody's on the show in L.A., and then I would write a story and send it to Australia the day before the show comes out, so they would know what was going to be on. Of course, I mean, I pissed a few people off, but they were always glad to. The Sydney Morning Herald, and of course even the South China Post. There's a lot of English readers of the South China Post that I would sell stories to.
What made you, with all of your travels, what made you well, before we go there, during the O.J. Simpson trials,
right.
For those of us that were around, ladies and gentlemen, that was the biggest thing that happened since sliced bread. Well, since the Sharon Tate murders. And it was on television 24/7, right?
Yvonne. Yeah,
Go ahead.
Let me interrupt you, Yvonne. The O.J. trial, I have never in my life seen another story like the O.J. trial, because almost anything you come up with would sell. It would sell in the United States. I mean, everybody wanted to hear anything about this. And I guess financially it was the best year I ever had. But, yeah, I mean, they say they talk about that a news event that has a lot of reporters there is a feeding frenzy. The O.J. trial was the greatest feeding frenzy in the history of the world. I've never seen anything like it, and I will probably never see anything like the O.J. trial again.
To say there was blood in the water is an understatement. There wasn't just blood in the water. It was a massive overflow of blood in the sharks. Not only circled, they ate and gobbled and inhaled and everything else.
Yeah, right.
Like you said, I've never seen anything like it.
Of course. By the same token, in a lot of ways, the O.J. trial changed the course of American journalism, because when the O.J. trial come along, all of the standard publications, particularly the daily news, like the L.A. Times, Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, the New York Post, the Miami Herald, all the big newspapers, all of a sudden they realized what a first that the American public had for a story like the O.J. story. You got drugs and sex and scandal and hatred and betrayal and disloyalty, deceit, blah, 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 blah. And when the major dailies saw what of a hunger that the American public had for this kind of information, then they started to slowly but surely run more and more and more of it. And then not only did the dailies start doing more and more, but television started running more and more and more stuff like the O.J. And consequently, as a result, as the dailies and the television runs more and more scandal, it really hurt tabloids, because people could get tabloid information on their television and in their daily newspaper, whereas before they could only get it with the tabloids. So in a lot of ways, the O.J. trial hurt the tabloids, simply because that that people that other news outlets, dailies and television, and of course the vast spectrum of the internet, it all became free rather than having to buy it. When everybody liked the O.J. trial, everybody loved tabloid stories. Everybody did. And it brought about a change in American journalism, a lot of change that I don't think a lot of people ever really realized.
And it also changed the dynamic of news reporting, because you went from
absolutely
3 stations to 24/7 CNN and Fox News and MSNBC.
Right.
And then you went to open trials.
Right. Yeah, I was in the feed room for almost all of the OJ trial. In my book, Thanks PG, which is a fictionalized memoir of my days with the tabloid newspapers. I mentioned that in there. Just how the OJ the OJ trial was probably the most seminal event in journalism in the United States in the entire century. You know, they had some in the early part of the century. They had the Lindbergh trial, and of course they had a lot of different stories. But to my mind, the most seminal event in American journalism in the last 50 years of the 20th century was the OJ, and then it changed. It changed not only changed. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, and I was going to add to that. As opposed to the Lindbergh trial, OJ's was all in real time. You get to see the police chase, you get to see the arrest, you get to see the trial, you get to see the crime scene, whereas the Lindbergh trial was all filmed at 11, so to speak.
Yeah, it was all kind of circumstantial. Right.
And it forever changed the dynamic of even true journalistic reporting.
Oh, absolutely. I'm totally agreeing with you.
Let me run two ads real quick, and we're going to come back and continue this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Off the Chain. I'm your host, Yvonne Mason, with my guest, John Isaac Jones, who is an author, and we're talking journalism, and we're talking books, and we're talking all kinds of stuff. So stay with us, and we'll be right back because we've got a whole lot more to go.
Do you have cougars on your porch swing? Are horses your new best friend? Do your nicest shoes get buried knee-deep in snow as your toes turn blue? Are you bothered by wolves at your woodpile? No, not that kind of wolf. Join wildlife artist and author Nancy Quinn and her family as they discover an exciting new life in Go West, Young Woman, a true Montana adventure. Available online and in bookstores. Or visit QuinnWildlifeArt.com for a personalized signed copy. Critics agree, it's a hoot.
Hi, this is Winona
and Jade inviting you to join us
and our wonderful guests on the And I Thought Women's Cave podcast
on Blog Talk Radio to learn more about our books, the And I Thought series, and
the Misfit Guides. They're available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNobles.com.
Or just to see what your ladies are up to, you can find all of that out on www.andwethought.com.
So peace and love from Winona
and Jade and our books.
Girl,
You're so
silly.
You silly.
Remember,
did you write that? That's funny.
Remember to visit us at andwethought.com.
And we are back. I'm Yvonne Mason. This is Off the Chain, and my guest tonight is author John Isaac Jones. And for those of you that are just joining us, he is a former reporter, and we've been talking about his days in the reporting madhouse and the feeding frenzy during the OJ trial. When you were in the middle of all that insanity, and as you step back years later, did it hit you at the time just how much the dynamic of investigative reporting and the feeding frenzy of reporters changed from that day?
No, I didn't. It's strange, Yvonne, that you don't recognize those things immediately. You kind of have to let them happen, and then kind of history and society and the tides of human affairs work on them, and that's when you realize it. Like I was saying, after the daily newspapers and television realized how much that the public hungered for the kind of information that was in the OJ trial, they started running more and more those kind of stories, more and more and more and more and more. And consequently, like I say, it hurt. It hurt. Of course, I mean, print publications going down the tubes anyway. But even even 2 or 3 years later, the O.J. trial was from October of '95 until the summer of '96, and even now, sometimes when I look back at it, you marvel at just what an explosive experience it was. Not only from the standpoint of journalism, but from the standpoint of cultural history. I mean, more people watching the O.J. trial than they were, the soap operas. I mean, it was
because it was a real life soap opera
phenomenon.
Yeah, it was a real life soap opera. Here you had this beloved sports figure that went from being one of the best NFL players in the league, and none could compare, still can't compare to him, to watching him run through airports as the Juice in commercials, and then watch his decline in a premeditated murder. And to this day, people are still divided as to his guilt and innocence.
Right. Very true.
It's mind-boggling, and now that set the precedent for open trials. Jodi Arias comes to mind. Casey Anthony comes to mind, where you sit there and you hear the testimony, and because of mine and my husband's background, we're sitting there shaking our heads going, why did the prosecution go down that road? Why did the prosecution ask that question? Why did they not follow through? Because that's our background. So it's amazing, like you say, how the dynamic of 24/7 television has changed, that we get things now that you can't get, sadly, in print. Well, number one, a lot of the journalists now can't even spell their own name, much less write a column that you can understand when you read. And watching it in real time. I mean, now we see real-time school shootings, we see real-time jailbreaks, we see real-time trials. It must be awful hard for print journalists now to even try to do a story.
Yeah, it's media, particularly electronic media, has become so pervasive in our society over particularly the last 10 or 15 years. It's been coming a long time, since the days of personal computers. But nowadays we have so many medias that are available to us that sometimes we can't tell one from the other. Sometimes we don't know which media is the real media. There's so many. Each media in its own way is a reality, and so consequently, sometimes we have so many realities being thrown at us that we can't always tell which one's real.
You are so right. Now, let's fast forward. How did this Southern gentleman, starting out in Alabama, going out to the West Coast, get involved with the O.J. trial, wind up? Now, ladies and gentlemen, Merritt Island is an hour and a half north of me. It's a nice little community. It's beachfront. It's a sleepy little town. How in the world did you wind up on Merritt Island?
Well, I came down here to visit some friends. Actually, I lived in South Florida for a long time. The Enquirer is the home base. Their world headquarters is at Lantana, which is a suburb of West Palm Beach.
Yeah.
And I would when I first came here, I love Florida. I've always loved Florida. But in 2012, I came down here to visit some friends, and they had a beach house down at Merritt Island. They asked me to go down there with them. And I don't know, I just love the white sand and the palmetto and the mangroves, I've been all over Florida, but I mean, I said, well, this is the place here. And right now, Yvonne, I'll never leave Florida. I mean, there's no, in the month of May, there's no place on earth like Florida, because in a day's time, you can get 15 different kinds of weather, get 5 different kinds of rain and 7 different kinds of sunshine, and so yeah, I love Florida. I love Florida, and I particularly love the Treasure Coast, right along Merritt Island, and just south of Titusville, and I just love this part of Florida.
Well, speaking of Titusville, there's nothing like Dixie Crossroads.
Oh yeah, right. Everybody in the world's heard of that place. Everybody in the world knows about the seafood there.
Best food I've ever put in my mouth. And I'm like you. When I first came to Florida, my husband said, "Now, you're either going to love it or hate it." He says, "If you hate it, I understand." He says, "Florida's not for everybody." Well, I took to it like duck to a water.
Right.
I'm from Georgia, lived in Georgia all my life, except for 6 months when I lived in Seattle. But like you, as soon as I came here in the Treasure Coast, that's where I live, I fell in love with it. The skies were bright, eye-burning blue. The air was clear. There was no smog.
Right.
And I love it. I don't think I'll ever leave either because it's in my blood now.
Right.
And speaking of blood, ladies and gentlemen, this man has written some of the most fabulous books. I downloaded two of his books today. One was a short story, and the other one is a collection of short stories. And when I started reading them, if I had not known that he was from the South, specifically Alabama, I would have figured it out in reading his stories, because as I was reading his stories, I could relate to them. Even though I'm from Georgia, my ex-husband's family lived in Jackson County, Alabama, which is South Pittsburgh, Scottsboro, and right below that is Gadsden. And as I'm reading these stories, I am seeing these people in my mind, and they could have been some of my ex-husband's relatives. Absolutely amazing. How in the world did you come to write Stories from Alabama and Annie? They were fabulous.
I don't know. It's kind of like when you grow up. What's the old saying? Who was it used to say? You can take the boy out of the country, but can't take the country out of the boy.
Yep.
When I grew up, I traveled all over, but I wrote Alabama stories probably 1995, 1996. By then, I'd traveled all over the world and worked for newspapers and television and worked some of the biggest stories. I worked in New York. I worked in Miami. I worked in Washington. I worked 4 years in Washington with Carter. And finally, I just decided, that, I just wanted to go back home again. I just wanted to see a Sea Rock City sign. I wanted to taste chicken and dumplings. And when I sat down and started writing it, all those memories of being a child, growing up, and being on a farm and being around farmers and being around country people and being around Southerners. I mean, down and dirty Southerners. And when you read Boone, I mean that story is based is the skeleton of the story is true. About my mother. My mother undertook the care of this woman who was dying, and that the basis of that story is true. Of course, I embellished here and there and intensified and exaggerated over there, but the basics of that story is true. But when you read those short stories, all of those stories are based on some reality in my life. One of those stories is based on Annie is based on a true story of my grandmother, my grandmother's mental houses. Boone is based on the story of my mother tending to this woman. A Virtuous Woman is based on my grandmother, and that's based on the true story that my grandmother had in a family fight with her sister. So essentially, all of those short stories, there's 17 short stories in there. All of them have some basis in reality, some origins in my growing up years in Alabama. And even now I can sit down and read them, Yvonne. I can sit down and read them, and it's just like it. It all happened yesterday. It's just. But thank you very much for your.
They're amazing. That's okay.
Well, thank you.
when I was reading Annie, I could see the house. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Annie's an interesting character. I'm not going to tell you the story except that it involves a woman and two little boys, and an old house that's raised up off the ground in the middle of hundreds of acres in BFE, Alabama. But these little boys bite off more than they can chew. And I'm reading this story, and I see these little boys, and they think they're getting away with something, and in the end, it's more than they can handle. Now, he talked about the virtuous woman. I'm reading that story, and I'm going, oh, this is not going to end well. This is not going to end well. And I kept reading, and then I got godsmacked with the ending of it, and she was a whole lot smarter than they thought she was. Loved it. And Boone broke my heart because my mother and father, if my father had lived, he would have been 90 years old on June the 3rd. And he's been gone to be 3 years this August. And he and my mother would have been married 70 years. My mother's now 88 and in very bad health. And I'm reading Boone, John, and I'm thinking of my mother and my father. And if I cried easily, I would have been blubbering like an idiot because that short story is so true of an old school married people that had that deep abiding love and everything was about the other person. My grandparents were that way, my mother and my father were that way. They took their vows very seriously and they lived for each other. And to read that story just broke my heart.
Well, thank you. It's I've had quite a few reviews of it, and probably if I thought I don't know, I wrote a short story called Going Home about 3 years ago that has won some prizes, but in my heart, Boone is probably my favorite short story of everything I've ever written. Of all the short stories, my favorite novel is either The Hand of God or maybe The Dug Springs Affair. But Boone is in my heart my favorite short story. And I've had
you brought that story to life so visually that I saw every action, I saw every emotion, I saw every broken heart. I saw this little boy. I saw the story through this child's eyes, and people, no, y'all can't go now. You've got to wait because we're going to get to another book that is pretty close to my heart because it happened down here. But when we get off from here, go and get Alabama Stories because you will not be the same again. I promise you. You outdid yourself, John.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
Yes, I did. Let's talk about the Hand of God. Now, tell the listening audience about this backstory because it is an amazing story that just blew the state off the map because this couple was very well known.
Yeah, that this happened in 1955. There was in Palm Beach County, Florida. There was a presiding circuit judge, whose name was Curtis Chillingsworth. And one night, him and his wife just disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to them. They were, and nobody had any clues as to what happened. They were at their beach house at Manalapan, and they had told their kids and their friends that they were going to the beach for the weekend, and they just disappeared. No word was heard of them for something like 5 years. Now, in my book deals with all this. What happened was that. As presiding judge, he had reprimanded a local attorney in Palm Beach County, a man named Joe Peel. And he had told him that this guy had represented a man and a woman in a divorce case. He represented both. He represented both a man and a woman in the same murder case, which is unethical. You can't do that. You got to have separate lawyers. Anyway, Judge Chillingsworth reprimanded him for this, and Judge Chillingsworth said, this is your last chance. If anything else like this happens, I'm going to disbarge you. You're going to lose your license to practice law in the state of Florida. So he sends a young black man named Bobby Lincoln and this small-time criminal named Lucky Holzapfel, and they go to the back of the Chillingsworth Beach home. They're in Manalapan. Get them out of bed and put them on a boat, and they start out to the Gulf Stream with him. Now, the Gulf Stream runs parallel to the coast. So they start out to the coast with them. They've got both of them tied up, and so they get out there to the middle of the Gulf Stream, and they get ready to kill them. So the woman, they put diving weights on her, and of course she's just a tiny little thing anyway. And so they put diving weights on her, and they just dump her over the side, and of course she dies immediately. But her husband, who also they have in the boat to kill, he jumps overboard. And here they are. He's a former Navy man, and he's swimming in the water. They put diving weights on him, and this man is 56 years old. He's swimming in the water. So they're chasing him in the boat, trying to kill him, and him swimming. They get to him with the boat. They hit him in the head. They bloody his head, and they can't kill him. And finally, they take a shotgun and kill him. And then, of course, he goes right down. And nobody ever knew about it until the Holzapfel, the man who was the ringleader of the whole thing. He started getting drunk, started talking, and when he did, the truth started to come out, and the law got onto it. He wasn't convicted until about 1961, although the incident occurred in 1955. But there's some heart-wrenching scenes during the murder, because when they got ready to kill her, they put the diving weights on her and got ready to throw her overboard. And he said, "Remember, I love you." And when they're throwing her in the water, he says, "I love you, I love you." And as she goes down, it's really some heartbreaking scenes there. And while they're taking Judge Chillingsworth and his wife out to the Gulf Stream to kill him, the boat breaks down. The boat stops running, and the judge, for whatever reason, tells them how to fix it. They use his advice to fix the boat, and then after they fix the boat and go back out the Gulf Stream, the judge asked him. He says, "You still want to kill me after I helped you fix the boat?" And he said, "He also said, why?" This guy, Lucky Holzapfel, was a cold-blooded man. He had ice in his veins. This guy Holzapfel did. But when he was convicted, I believe, in 1961, and he spent something like 22 years up at Rayford. And then he got testicular cancer, and they let him go home, and his wife was in Titusville, and when they let him go home, he lived about 3 days, because the doctor said, he hadn't got long, so they let him go home. And after he got home, he lived about 3 days. But he was a cold-blooded man. I mean, a brutal. He was a killer's killer. This guy was. He could smile and blow you away. It's the kind of man he was.
And didn't they finally tie that crime back to Peel?
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. Absolutely. They because after when Holzapfel was in the Palm Beach County Jail before he was sentenced and sent to Rayford, he found out that Peel tried to smuggle a package of cigarettes to him, which was laced with cyanide, and that's when he turned against Peel and turned state's evidence and told the state that yes, that Peel is the guy that wanted me to kill him, and Peel paid him $10,000 to kill the judge and his wife. But yeah, and then Peel was convicted. He was given 2 life sentences because he was responsible for 2 deaths. And then he was kind of like Holzapfel. They gave him 2 life sentences, and I think he was in jail something like 16 or 17 years. And then he went. When he got so sick, they let him go home, and then I think he lived 9 days after he got home. He of course, by then his life was in a shambles. You know, he had this beautiful wife and this beautiful home and this luxurious lifestyle, and but I mean, his entire world collapsed. You know, after he was convicted of murdering the children. The Chillingsworth. That was Curtis and Marjorie. His wife's name is Marjorie. They'd been married for something like I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Continue.
No, those two had been together. Curtis and his wife Marjorie. She was 2 years younger, and both of them were members of prominent legal families in West Palm Beach, and they had been together. Oh gosh! I mean, ever since they were, you know, he was 2 years younger. They got married when she was 17, and he was something like 20 or something like that. But I mean, these two had been together, for 20 years. He had been a circuit judge in Palm Beach County for 32 years at the time. He was first elected to the bar when he was 24, and the next year he was elected as a county judge, and then 2 years later he was a circuit judge. And at the time that Holzoppel and Bobby Lincoln killed him and his wife, he had been a presiding circuit judge in Palm Beach County for 32 years. So he had he was the foremost legal mind in Palm Beach County at the time.
And what's so sad is Peel really thought he was going to get away with it. And
right. Of course, I mean, that's normally the way it is with a cold-blooded killer. You know, they think they're going to get away with it, but justice catches up with them inevitably. You know.
Well, what drew you to this case to write The Hand of God?
When I was in 1975, I was working for the Birmingham News, and I was offered a job with the Enquirer, which is based in Lantana, Florida, which is a suburb of West Palm Beach. And when I was doing my tryouts for the Enquirer, there was a kind of a tourist magazine in the hotel there. And in the tourist magazine was the story of the Chillingsworths. And I remember reading that story about how that these two men took this old couple out and just brutally murdered them. About how that they killed her very easily, but they fought Chillingsworth. They fought him for 30 or 40 minutes because he was a Navy man. He could swim, and when they thought when they put those diving weights on his legs, they just threw him overboard and he'd sink. But he didn't. He was swimming. He was swimming with his diving weights on him, and they chased him with a boat and tried to hit him with a paddle, and finally shot him with a shotgun, and he went under. But I remember at the time, Yvonne, I was just so fascinated by this story, It was just so fascinated by the story because of the stark reality of taking this old couple and killing them like they were just, a couple of dogs, It stuck with me, It's really a fascinating story,
Well, the sad part is we lost a brilliant judge. Who knows what else he could have done with his life.
Oh, absolutely.
Because of greed, and that's what it was on Peel's part, was just greed and utter criminal. He was a criminal-minded person.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Of course, he paid for it dearly. I mean, his entire life was in shreds by the time his trial was over. He lost his wife, he lost his kids, he lost his home, he lost everything he ever had. When he was about ready, when he was at Rayford, after he had served about 15 years, his wife had divorced him, and he had been corresponding with his ex-wife's niece, who had been a bridesmaid at his wedding, and he was due. They tried to get married when the state judicial system let him out of prison to go home to die. He was going to marry his niece, who was something like, 25, 30 years younger than he was, but it never happened because he was too sick to pull it off. But yes, he paid dearly for killing that old couple. He paid dearly for it. He had no life after it was over. Of course, neither did Holzapfel. But I mean, Holzapfel in some ways was Holzapfel. His name was Lucky. Lucky Holzapfel was a cold-blooded killer. I mean, he could just kill you for nothing. Now, Peel was more diplomatic. He was an attorney. You know, he would try to sway you before he blew you away. he was a white-collar crime. You know, he's a white-collar crime.
That brings me full circle to the fact that you have a thing that you wrote called Writing Part 1, and you state that when you see something or read something that strikes a chord, write it down.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
You never know.
That's right. The main thing, any good writer knows to be constantly on the lookout for good story ideas. And you never know when they're going to come, but if you're looking for them, you'll find them. One of the short stories I wrote was The Old Indian. Was about a 40-page short story that I was at my aunt's funeral 3 years ago in Alabama, and we were after the services we were all having dinner, and I talked to one of my daughter's friends, and he just in one line he just said something that got a 40-page short story out of it. So if you're a good writer, I mean, if you want to write, you should always be on the lookout for good story ideas, because they are few and far between. There's a lot of stories out there, but there's only a few good ones.
And you have to be willing to sometimes hunt for the little nuggets, and it doesn't even have to be a sentence. It can just be one word or two words.
That's right. That's the way this was. That's the way it was with The Old Indian. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
Well, what do you have coming down the pike?
Well, at the moment, I'm still selling some paperbacks. I still sell some audio books. I'm probably the best sales of all the different media I'm selling. You know, the audio books are selling best. I sell the paperbacks are pretty good. Ebooks are okay. For the last 2 months, I've been converting my novels into screenplays. Now, my romance novel, The Duck Springs Affair, is now being hawked in L.A. as a screenplay. At the moment, I am developing The Hand of God as a screenplay. In fact, I'm just about halfway through it right now. I've discovered this software of this Canadian company that really makes writing a screenplay easy. You know, I can remember trying to write screenplays in the 80s, and I mean, it was just maddening. But I mean, this new software I've discovered just makes it. I mean, it's child's play. If you got the ideas, I mean, formatting and, you know, dialogue and character and parentheticals and scene headings and all that, it's really a breeze with this new software. I found I'm really fortunate to have found this software. But yeah, I'll get back. You know, books are my first love, Yvonne. You know, I can write screenplays, but books are my first love. So, you know, I'll be back to writing fiction. I've still got, you know, 10 or 12 books in me. I probably won't live long enough to write all of them, but I'll get most of them written. You know.
Well, I hope so, because I found one of my new favorite authors. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, if you have not yet read John Isaac Jones, and when this show's over, go and download or even order the paperbacks, because this man is absolutely amazing. That's not even the right word. There are no words to describe his writing. He not only sets you in the story, you become part of the story. You become the characters in the story. You see the story through their eyes. You fall in love with them, or you grow to hate them, depending on if they're the protagonist or if they're the villain. I mean, it's just, John, I love your work.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Also, you're not going to believe this, but our hour's almost up.
Okay.
The time has absolutely flown by, but what I want you to do, first of all, don't hang up when the show goes dark, because I got some things for you. But before then, I want to thank you for coming on the show tonight and sharing your story with us. I've just been fascinated listening to you. And second of all, tell the folks where you can be found.
Well, you can find me. You can go to Amazon. You can find all my books there. You can find. I've got a total of 26 books there. There is 6 or 7 novels, a book of short stories, and the rest of them are novellas. There's 5 or 6 novellas, and the rest of them are individual short stories. And you can go to BookBub. You can buy them. You can buy them on Barnes and Noble's website. But I mean, primarily Audible. If you like audio books, there's 20 of them. 20 of my books are on Audible. A lot of people they like to listen rather than read. So consequently, I've been doing pretty well with those lately. But yeah, just on Amazon, just go to Google and type in John Isaac Jones, and you'll see all of them there.
And I know I'm going to get The Hand of God and Audible for my husband. He can't read anymore, so I bought him a Kindle, and I download him Audible books. So if The Hand of God is on Audible, I am definitely downloading that for him, because he was working with the state attorney's office up here in the 19th Judicial Circuit when this crime happened.
Right. Your husband was an attorney?
Yeah, so he was an investigator for him. So
right.
This will be right up his wheelhouse. I have a question. Will you come back and visit with us?
Oh, absolutely. I want you to put me down again for about November, okay?
You got
next time you got an opening, because I enjoyed this, Yvonne. I've enjoyed this immensely. Thank you.
Thank you for spending the hour with me, because you are a very busy man, and I appreciate your patience, and thank you for waiting and being here tonight. It's very humbling. Ladies and gentlemen, there are things that I say at the end. Oh, he can also be found on Facebook, ladies and gentlemen, under John Isaac Jones. I suggest you go and friend him. After the show goes dark, don't go now. Just wait. Because there's some things that I always say, and one of those things that I say is people will forget your name. They'll forget what you look like. They'll forget what you're wearing, but they will never, ever, ever forget how you make them feel. And my prayer is that every one of you, listener and guest alike, understand that you are the most important person in the room. Without y'all, the show would not be what it is today. It would not be as successful. It would not be as well known. It would not be, because I could sit here and talk all day long and nobody would care. Y'all are the ones that make the show important, and I am so grateful and humbled about it. And I hope you understand that my intent is to make you feel like you're the most important person in the room, because you are. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, there is an old adage that if you want to achieve greatness, stop asking permission, because nobody's going to give it to you. If you want to achieve greatness, and I'm not talking about even being the President of the United States or the Queen of England, I'm talking about greatness within yourself. I'm talking about being successful within yourself. Don't ask permission. Just go out and do it. Do like John did. If the path you're on is not your path, change the path. Don't be afraid to change the path. But it's not the destination that is the end goal. It's the journey that we take. So if you are waffling in the current occupation or the occupation you're headed to, it's not what you want, don't be afraid to change it. Because I'm going to tell you, you will be miserable if you don't. Right, John?
That's correct. Very true.
So change your path. Make a different path. And understand that it's your journey. You're the one that's taking it, not someone else. There are other people that go on the journey with you, but it's not their journey. It is your journey, and we're all on a journey. Every one of us are on a journey. So make your journey the best it can be, because we only go around once in life. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you for tuning in. We will be here again tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time with yet another wonderful guest. So join us. Look up John on Facebook, on Amazon. Get his books, because they're wonderful. And until tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, I am your host, Yvonne Mason, here at Off the Chain with my guest, John Isaac Jones. And we want to wish you all a wonderful, wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay well, and love each other and yourself. And with that, we say good evening.
Thank you, Yvonne.
You're quite welcome. All right, we're off the air. The show is now in the archives, part of the show, and everything we say is going to show up in the archives, sort of like the outtakes of the movies. But what I wanted to tell you is once the show archives, I'm going to put the link on my Facebook page, and I'm going to tag you in it. And that is one of my gifts to you. You take this show and you spread it everywhere.
Well, thank you very much. Now,
you are welcome. Tomorrow it goes up on SoundCloud and Spreaker, YouTube, podcast.com, Podcast Garden, FM.com, iHeartRadio, Spotify. So when I put it up,
would you please put me down for another appearance in about November when you have another opening?
Absolutely. I will absolutely do it with happiness because I have enjoyed tonight so much. And you're going to be heard in over, you are welcome, you're going to be heard in over 200 countries when I put it up on all the podcasts. And when I put the podcast up, I will put the link up on my page and tag you in it as well. All of my Facebook posts are integrated to Twitter, so it automatically goes up on Twitter. It also goes up on it goes up on Google Plus, it goes up on Tumblr, it goes up on Reddit. So you're going to be seen and heard everywhere.
Okay, good. Good, thank you.
And you can share it with your network, and let's get you in some places you might not be heard before. And yes, I will add you to the November schedule because there were books we didn't even touch on.
Yeah, that's true.
And so
then I look forward to the next time, Yvonne.
All right, my dear. So I will send you a note as to the date in November. And thank you once again for spending an hour with me, John. It was a pleasure.
And thank you for spending an hour with me, Yvonne.
All right, my dear. And I will also send you the information for the Space Coast Book Lovers event, too.
Okay, all right, great. I appreciate that.
All right, my darling. We'll talk later.
All right, take care, Yvonne. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.